And good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are presented today by Kroger, and we are happy with you and happy to have you on the show. In fact, you'll be able to see me here in just a second, see what my face looks like here today. There we come. There I am right there. We're glad to have you here. Jeff Sentell stops by. Could be commitment watch for Georgia here today. We'll tell you why that is. I think there are three really big reasons to be very excited about tomorrow's game against UAB, not even involving the night game, which we'll obviously talk about. We have talked about a lot already this week. But even beyond the night game atmosphere and the kind of cool stuff with that, I think on the field, involving the 11 players on the field at the time for Georgia, I think there's some stuff to be interested about right there. And so we're obviously going to get into all of that. And in addition to that, stepping away from Georgia just briefly, we'll also touch on what is an amazing slate of games involving top 25 teams on Saturday, SEC matchups on Saturday. You know, this is one of those things when you look at the summertime, you're like, gosh, can you believe when we get to week 4, it's going to be amazing. Well, guess what? Week 4 is here, and we're excited about it. So we're going to talk about all of that over the course of our time together, including a few reasons here off the top that I think that Georgia UAB is very much worth your attention tomorrow there, too. So we're glad to have you with us here on a Friday. Going to be a good one. It's DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So before the show today, I tried to dig through the internet to see if I could find one of those old ESPN graphics or a shot of one of the old ESPN graphics. I think we talked about this in one of the days this week. The idea of Showdown Saturday. ESPN, it seems like years ago, used to kind of put some theming around a big weekend. And it seems like every year around this time, late September, early October, it's just one of the biggest weekends of the year with so many massive games. And there's just a little bit of extra excitement because of the level of competition. And we're going to get into more of these games a little bit later on. There are so many good games on Saturday, it's sort of hard to talk about them all. Last week, you might say that there were so few, at least on paper, really good football games. It was hard to find enough to talk about for content and things like that. This week, it's one of those things where there are so many that there are a handful that probably kind of fly under the radar. That's a really fun weekend. And there are times in which the action away from Athens, especially in this era in which Georgia's been so good, and some of the games for Georgia have been rendered kind of non-competitive, there are moments in a season in which the action away from Athens is so compelling that it actually might make me slightly more interested in some of that than I might be in a Georgia game where it seems like the outcome is already predetermined. Perhaps you maybe either heard in the sound of my voice, or maybe I just said this overtly. First couple of weeks, I was not that into Georgia UT Martin. I was not that into Georgia Ball State. I think we're kind of in an era now where I think it is more than fair to question whether those games should even be played. And while UAB on paper isn't really any better than UT Martin or certainly Ball State, Georgia's a 42-point favorite on Saturday. For whatever reason, I am just way more interested in this Georgia UAB game than any of the previous kind of cupcake-style games that Georgia's played already this year. And on a day in which my attention as someone who loves college football, loves Georgia football specifically, but beyond that, loves college football in general, even on a day in which we're really interested in what happens next for Coach Prime and really, really excited about Ohio State, Notre Dame, and then the Alabama soap opera, how does that kind of bleed onto the field on Saturday against Ole Miss? We're really into all those things. The truth is, for me, I am just as excited about Georgia UAB as I am any of the other games. And I'm not overstating that, I don't think. I'm not trying to exaggerate my opinion on that just for the sake of having some content to discuss. I do truly believe that. In fact, I'm going to try to make the case for you here over the course of the next couple of minutes. I want to give you 3 reasons why. And I want to start with Kirby Smart here, because if you go back to Saturday, Kirby Smart was asked a very interesting question that he gave a very compelling answer to in his post-game press conference on Saturday. Georgia had overcome some adversity to beat South Carolina. Coaches talk about that kind of stuff all the time. Kirby Smart in particular talks about that kind of stuff all the time. And so therefore, if it's good to overcome adversity, and if, as Smart had said previously in that press conference on Saturday, if you learn something about your team by how they handle adversity, then in a roundabout way, are you then glad the game against the Gamecocks last week unfolded the way that it did? And in saying no to that question, Smart then took the conversation to a slightly different place, which I think sets the stage very well for what we could see tomorrow against UAB. This is Kirby Smart on the subject of his team handling adversity on Saturday and what Kirby would rather see, his preference would be for these Dogs. This is Kirby from last Saturday.
My expectation is we go out and dominate and create a nightmare and make people never want to play you again. We didn't do that today. We didn't make them never want to play us again. But we did respond to adversity, and that's all it is. I mean, it's going to happen all over the country, guys. Go look. It's going to happen all over the country. People have to play close games to get better. And the expectation that's created for these teams that are the top tier teams, it wasn't created by them. It's created by perception. You are what you do on the field. And we are, right now, a team that has played 3 average first halves. I don't know if they're even average, but they have responded.
So let me tell you how I interpret what Kirby Smart says there. Obviously, he would say it's good that our team handled adversity on Saturday against South Carolina, and any eventual national champion will have to overcome a little bit of adversity on the way to winning it all. That's what Smart says. But the additional subtext of what Smart's saying there is, while it's good to handle some adversity well, it's a lot better to cause adversity for the team you're playing, that you want to dominate them. You want to be a nightmare for them. You want to make them never want to play again. That it's okay every now and then to handle adversity, but you better spend most of your time causing adversity. You better spend most of your time punishing the team that you're playing. And frankly, thus far this year, I don't quite know that we've seen Georgia really do that. We certainly did not see that against South Carolina. And I think you turn your attention to UAB on Saturday to say, well, is this the day that finally Georgia, and admittedly, you'll only take so much from this because UAB is a pretty bad football team. But is this the day that Georgia finally causes adversity for the team that it's playing? Does it punish them? Does it dominate them? Does it make it a nightmare for them? Does it make them never want to play the sport again? The kind of cool language that Smart uses in the clip that we just heard. And so if you want to know one of the reasons why I'm interested in this game against UAB is because I want to see if Georgia can kind of come out there and set the tone in that regard from the start. It seems like this team's sort of chomping at the bit to be able to do that. And now with our own eyes on Saturday night to see if they can actually take that next step before the season moves into a little bit more of what I think of as kind of the stretch run coming up after that. Now, you hear Kirby Smart say that, but when you listen to Georgia players here this week, you get the sense that they are starting to feel a little bit of restlessness about the fact that maybe yet they haven't quite shown everything they can be, and are kind of ready to show that as they go out and play here this week and moving on to the future. I'm going to give you an example of that. Zion Logue, who I think is an amazing kind of what I think of as sort of a spiritual leader for this Georgia defense, one of the most animated players on the field. He's always pumping up the crowd and getting folks excited. I love to watch Zion Logue right before snaps because I think he's just really entertaining to have your eyes on. Well, he was really frustrated off Saturday's game because Georgia gave up a rushing touchdown, and perhaps the rushing defense for Georgia, even though it's better than almost anybody in the country, hasn't quite been up to the standard that he wants to be as of yet. So Kirby Smart says last Saturday after the game, hey, we didn't dominate. We didn't create a nightmare for our opponent. And when it comes to the defensive side of this, rush defense in particular, that's something that Zion Logue says that can't stand much longer. He's about ready to see that change. So on the idea of the mindset, the attitude, the psyche that Georgia brings into the game tomorrow night, let's let Zion Logue's words give us a taste of what that might be like.
Closing your eyes when you're watching film, don't even want to see it. Just makes your stomach sick. We show our standings every week, and just with us being fifth in rushing defense right now, it makes me sick. I want to fix it right now, but I can't fix it till Saturdays.
I love it. He says, I want to fix it right now. I'm not happy with how our rush defense is played. To use his words here, I wouldn't dare say this to him. He said it himself. I'm embarrassed we gave up a rushing touchdown to South Carolina. I'm embarrassed by that. I want to fix that right now, but I have to wait until Saturday. Well, guess what? Saturday's tomorrow. And this Georgia defense that says we are chomping at the bit to go out there and really dominate an opponent the way that we expect Georgia to, We get a chance to see that tomorrow night. That's must-see TV for me, or those of you in the stadium. That's a must-watch experience to see how Georgia responds to a few weeks of, haven't quite got it going yet the way that Georgia expects to. This defense tomorrow could be something to watch. The crowd rallying behind them, night game atmosphere that UAB coach Trent Dilfer says will be better than the Super Bowl. That's a fun vibe for tomorrow night's game, and I don't care who the opponent is, just seeing Georgia go out and show some teeth, I think it's about time for that to happen, and I think this Georgia team's about ready to do that. Now, on the other side of the ball, I also think it's fascinating there as well. And the one thing you've kind of heard me say a few times here is I don't know yet that we have fully seen that true breakout moment from Georgia quarterback Carson Beck. I think Beck's been more good than bad. I truly do. But in terms of really demonstrating who he is, the comparison I made a few weeks ago was the Stetson Bennett versus UAB moment, which ironically is also the opponent this Saturday as well. But I don't mean it because it's the same opponent. I mean it because we got a glimpse, success leaves clues, we got a glimpse of how good Bennett could be when he threw 5 touchdowns against UAB in 2021. And then when he started taking over full-time and leading this Georgia offense, we already knew that, wow, Bennett had some real skills behind him because he had that, really, really big game. We also referenced the flea flicker touchdown pass that Jake Fromm threw to begin the game against Mississippi State early stage of the 2017 season. That's also kind of a moment that lets you know that, hey, Jake Fromm can be a really trusted first-year starting quarterback for Georgia and perhaps lead you to where this team ultimately wants to go. I have suggested that I don't know that we've seen that moment yet from Carson Beck. But yesterday on the show, and I got a lot of feedback from some of y'all about a very strong appearance from Terrence Edwards yesterday on a number of topics, but I got a little bit of interesting response to Terrence Edwards when I said that I don't know that we've seen the real breakout introduction moment from Carson Beck yet as the Georgia quarterback. But on the show yesterday, the former great Georgia wide receiver Terrence Edwards said he thinks that I'm wrong, that actually that breakout moment for Beck may have come last week. And if Edwards is right, it's another reason why tomorrow is fascinating. This is what Terrence said on yesterday's show.
Well, I believe, in my opinion, I have to push back a little bit. I think his breakout moment was the second half of the South Carolina game. I think if you look at his stats, I think it was 12 for 17, about 150 yards in the rain. He would have led his team on 6 straight scoring possessions or something like that. Don't quote me on my stats. So I think he did exactly what I would like for him to do for 4 quarters in the second half versus an SEC opponent. Down 11 points. You got a quarterback that's starting his first SEC game in that type of environment, and he went and performed in that second half like I think I've seen and all the coaches have seen him do. So I think that was a pivotal moment for him and his confidence.
So what Terrence says there makes me so much more excited for this game on Saturday against an otherwise forgettable opponent in one of those games that you just sort of want to, in some cases, might just want to fast forward through to get ready for the big full SEC slate that's coming up starting next Saturday. What Terrence says about UAB, or about Carson Beck going into UAB, actually gets me much more excited about the game, because if Terrence is right and the breakout moment for Carson Beck occurred in the second half last week against South Carolina, then it stands to reason that would continue into the first half against UAB, doesn't it? That if they found a spark and if Beck kind of arrived fully and completely on the scene, then there ought to be some continuation and some carryover for this game tomorrow with Beck at the helm. And to put a negative spin on this just for a second, I don't think you want to go on the road next week having gotten off to 4 straight slow starts offensively, 4 straight kind of somewhat middling first halves in terms of, kind of how you're performing. I don't think you quite want to do that. I think there's a little bit of pressure on Georgia tomorrow to play well from the jump, from the get-go in the first half of this game. And what Terrence says perhaps is true, that the moment that gives this team the confidence they can do that, and not just play well in the first half tomorrow, but play well in the first half moving forward, the moment that gives this team the confidence to do that was that second half against South Carolina. And the point that Terrence is making is maybe bolstered by the fact that, hey, we made a big deal yesterday about the Beck wink, the deal he gave to the SEC network camera during the really cool viral video that we've all had so much fun talking about. maybe that cool, calm, collected presence in the locker room, maybe that's a little bit of an indication of how Beck is also feeling while he's on the field now moving forward too. Jake Fromm told us earlier this week that Georgia, I think, is trying, or Fromm would say he thinks is trying to give Beck some opportunities for success, allow him to go out there and just sort of play free and easy and comfortable, not robotic like Justin Fields said this week that he is for the Chicago Bears. And so perhaps all of this is on full display tomorrow. A Georgia offense perhaps firing on all cylinders for the first time here this year. Now, the final reason, which I think this game against UAB is going to be really fun to watch on Saturday and kind of a must-see if you're a Georgia fan is it does give us our last glimpse before things become much different for Georgia next Saturday. I have my eye on Auburn and Texas A&M here this week. I've said, even though the evidence might suggest otherwise, I believe Auburn can win this game outright. I definitely think they're going to keep it closer than the experts think against Texas A&M, and I believe they could take the next step and actually win the game. Whether Auburn does or doesn't, though, it is a big-time environment next week, a very, very challenging situation for any Georgia team going on the road like this. We've seen Georgia not play particularly well here in Jordan-Hare Stadium in the past. Let's be honest about that. And so now you got a brand-new starting quarterback, or now he's newish. He'll be, a third of the way through the regular season here this year after Saturday, as hard as that is to imagine. You got a newish Georgia team, some guys still kind of working their way into some sort of new roles here. And next week, they're on the road in the SEC. This is your last chance to get ready for that. This is your last chance to make sure you're as buttoned up and polished as you can be for the real challenge of a tough road environment in the SEC next Saturday. In fact, earlier this week, Kirby Smart talked about, in kind of tangible, specific terms, just how challenging playing on the road in the SEC can be for any team, his team included. And this is what Smart said about that.
It's a major deal. I mean, I study it hard, and it's amazing to me, the team that's on the road, the number of times it impacts third and fourth down. It's incredible. And you try like hell to avoid those, but we haven't played in that environment. I don't think some coaches acknowledge that it's 6 penalty advantage to play at home in the SEC, possibly. I mean, it's come out that way for us because teams have come here and gotten probably 5-6 more penalties on average. And you got to try to find a way to avoid that when you go on the road.
That is real. That is matter of fact. That is straight to the point from Kirby Smart. It's the kind of thing that the Georgia team right now obviously is considering. And so it wants the highest level of confidence it can have going into that environment at Auburn next Saturday. And the UAB game between the hedges this Saturday night, where the environment is in favor of Georgia, that's the last chance to build that confidence. I believe that Georgia will. Zion Logue speaks to the Georgia defense, saying this team is frothing at the mouth to go out there and correct any kind of misperception that might exist, that this still isn't the very best defense in the country. Former Georgia great Terrence Edwards says that he believes that Carson Beck had his breakout moment in the second half last week. The continuation of that breakout, full momentum on display on Saturday night. Georgia ready to pile up points early against UAB. I hope you're as excited for this as I am. It's a really, really cool snapshot after a few weeks of seeing some good from Georgia and some stuff we didn't love quite as much. Now it's our chance to see how Georgia puts it all together. And the last dress rehearsal, the last kind of practice game, if you will, the last kind of moment of preparation before the real tests begin. And I believe tomorrow night, Georgia's going to show that it's more than ready for what comes next. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and we are happy to have you with us. No matter how you get to us, video across all platforms, including our First and 15 at DawgNation.com and on the DawgNation app starting at 9:45 or 10 a.m. live everywhere else. Radio, of course, on 960 The Ref, that's in Athens, and podcast all across the fruited plain of podcast platforms. Just really happy to have you with us and being a part of our program today. Also, a big thanks to our friends at Kroger for making today's show possible there as well. And boy, there's some fun stuff happening with our friends from Kroger right now. How about Kroger Chef Jr. taking place at select Kroger locations? That's tomorrow. And it's a really cool menu item this month because when you do Kroger Chef Jr. with your kids, it's a guided kids cooking experience, so they get a chance to be a part of the food preparation process. And this month, the item being made is a pepperoni pizza salad, which is kind of a cool thing. So tomorrow at select Kroger location, you get a chance to be a part of that. It's just $7 per child. It's a 30-minute class. And in addition to getting a chance to make the pepperoni pizza salad together, you also get a chance to see your child get an apron, a patch, a chef's hat, and a cutting board. So some kind of cool stuff there, too. Once again, just $7 per child. So please make sure you check out KrogerChefJr.com for more on that. The word junior spelled out Junior, KrogerChefJr.com for more on that today. All right, coming up here in a moment, we're going to talk to Jeff Sentell, some UGA recruiting talk. That's going to be really cool. In fact, in just a second, I'll set up something we're going to discuss with Jeff, and I'll do that as a part of Around the Doghouse, poured today by our friends at the Finish Long Drink. And before I get to the recruiting note, let me also give you something that Georgia fans have been having a strong reaction to. Now, I believe I know what this is, and I think it's funny. It's probably not meant to be taken at face value, but a lot of Georgia fans have been reacting to a post from the Georgia Football Equipment account. Now, this is an official account, connected to the University of Georgia, but it's also an account that has kind of shown a little bit of a propensity in the past for a little bit of like deadpan fun at the expense of Georgia fans in a kind of a good-natured way. They're not intentionally trolling Georgia. They just sort of know what they're doing. They've kind of done this sort of thing before. So a lot of Georgia fans are talking about a video that the Football Equipment account put out of the purpose of the video is they're basically like counting the pants, and I think the video is done in as boring a way as it possibly can be of like, okay, so we sort these here. I'm not going to play the full video for you, but I'll put a link to it later on. You can watch it for yourself. We sort these pants here. We do it by position. And it's basically like the most like mundane, like sort of recitation of the pregame process for the football equipment people. But the punchline of the joke is, as the football equipment folks are talking about sorting the pants for game day, let me show you this on the screen here. This is a screenshot from the video. So you see on the table in the foreground, if you're watching on video, the folks working, they're folding pants and they're doing that. And then off in the background, you see some lockers. And when you zoom in those lockers, what you realize is it's the black jerseys like hanging in the locker, which to some people is taken as a possible foreshadowing of, ooh, could Georgia wear the black jerseys at night against UAB on Saturday? I think the UGA Football Equipment account knows what it's doing here. I think it's trying to be funny, and I think it succeeds. This is, to me, very funny. This is kind of a cool, funny punchline. I don't believe it's meant to be a little bit of a hint or a tip-off that they're wearing the black. I think this account has kind of done that before, and I don't mind when they do because I think funny social media content, certainly a welcome addition to most of our lives here. I think this is pretty funny. I like seeing Georgia fans have fun with this, but I don't think it means the Dogs wearing the black jerseys on Saturday. And I guess I will say that if and when Georgia does wear an alternate uniform again, I sort of hope it would kind of happen like this. In other words, I don't know that many Georgia fans want the calling for a blackout, right? We're going to make a big environment, blackout. Fans are all going to wear black. Georgia going to wear black jerseys. I don't know that's the right way to do it. There's a weird backstory, as you know, involving Georgia and these alternate jersey uniforms. And most of this, I think, has been overstated. I think some of this has been kind of logic misapplied, but it exists nonetheless. So therefore, there's a little bit of a level of friction about Georgia wearing something other than its traditional uniforms that some programs don't have, fairly or not. So I think if Georgia ever wants that to go away, it's got to normalize, I think, wearing alternate uniforms more frequently. Now, I say this as a pretty staunch traditionalist. My preference for every team in sports is that you got two uniforms, a home uniform and a road uniform. That's all you ever wear. That's my kind of preference as a staunch traditionalist. But admittedly, some of the stuff, whether it be like the kind of fantasy uniform concoctions that you see online or the stuff that the recruits wear, admittedly, I'm kind of softening my stance here in my, I don't want to say old age, but I'll use air quotes around old age. I'm kind of softening my stance a little bit on the idea of alternate uniforms because some of the stuff that I see is actually kind of cool. And then sometimes in my own head, when I'm just sort of bored or daydreaming, I'll kind of start trying to like imagine myself of what would it look like if Georgia wore all gray and had the whatever. Like, it's like even I sort of start doing some of that kind of stuff, here right now. So I'm a little bit softer edged about wearing alternate uniforms. If Georgia came out in black jersey tomorrow night, I'd be thrilled. I'd be happy about it. I don't want a ton of fanfare around it. I don't want blackout necessarily or anything that kind of could be construed as a level of motivation for Georgia because obviously that's not what uniforms should be or even are. But it can be kind of a cool fashion statement, and it could be fun. Weather won't be super hot. It's a night game. The atmosphere seems perfect to wear them. I don't believe Georgia's going to, and I believe the UGA football equipment account is just trying to have a little fun with us. I'll also mention this here really quickly there as well. So today, and by the way, I'm broadcasting here. It's almost 10:30 in the morning. So we're inside of 2 hours away from what could be a commitment announcement for a prime Georgia target for the class of 2025. It's a tight end named Ethan Barbour out of Alpharetta High School. I'll show you his list of finalists here on the screen. So he's choosing between Alabama and Auburn, Georgia, Ohio State, and South Carolina. Dogs, of course, already have Elias Williams committed for the class of 2025. But, Todd Hartley likes to work in pairs here. And Barbour is a guy that I've seen a good bit, had a chance to interact with a little bit. I like him as a player. I like him as a person, at least based on the interactions that I have. He's going to make his announcement today around, I think it's 12:15. I think he's getting ready to make his announcement. This is a guy I'd love to see, here at the University of Georgia, 6'3", 230 already. I kind of think of Barbour as a little bit more of a traditional tight end in comparison to the kind of hybrid, modified H-style tight end you see in other places. I think that Barbour is a little bit more of a classic tight end in my mind, but I think he'd be a nice add here to this Georgia class in 2025. And so when Jeff Sentell joins us in a minute, we're going to talk more about this, the possibility that Georgia could add to its next recruiting class before this day is done. And for what it's worth, we saw Barbour at the Ball State game. He was at the UT Martin game, so he's had plenty of Georgia visits as of late as a little bit of a harbinger for the decision that he might make here coming up this afternoon. And that is Around the Doghouse. It's poured today by our friends at the Finish Long Drink, and of course, here in the Peach State, we got all kinds of great high school football recruits, and we love celebrating them all. But something else in the Peach State we love celebrating right now is the peach-flavored version of the Finish Long Drink. It's the newest version of this ready-to-drink cocktail, a really cool category of beverage I think a lot of y'all are having a lot of fun with, and I don't think anybody does this style of drink better than our friends at the Finished Long Drink. Because if you like mixed drinks, this is a mixed drink that you don't have to mix yourself. It kind of comes in a can already. And so a lot of folks, when you see somebody holding the can, you may think it's a beer because you're used to beer coming in a can. But this is a mixed drink in a can, or as we call it, a ready-to-drink cocktail. So we want you to try to seek out and find this peach-flavored version of the Finished Long Drink because we think you're going to enjoy it. But if you don't have a chance to do that, any of the other versions of the Finished Long Drink goes great for you, too. The traditional, that's a blue can, got the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick, Long Drink Strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume, the Long Drink Zero, no carbs, no sugar. There's a cranberry version of the Finished Long Drink. People love that. A lot of the folks in my neighborhood especially love that. Pool parties, things like that, the Finished Long Drink, always very popular. And it's a great choice for your tailgating needs heading towards the weekend there, too. So find them online, thelongdrink.com. thelongdrink.com. You can pick yourself up some Finished Long Drink here for the weekend, including the peach-flavored version of the Finished Long Drink, available for a limited time right here in the Peach State. All right, so commitment watch possibly for Ethan Barbour. A lot of visitors to Georgia last week. A lot of movement and activity here for Georgia on both classes, 2024 and 2025, and a chance to see the most prized recruit of all for the class of 2024 with me on TV tonight. Let's cover all of that with Jeff Sentell here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let us say hello, Jeff Sentell here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. A lot of recruiting information to get into with Jeff today, and we're happy to do it all, including the possibility that by shortly after the time our live show is done and prior to the moment in which a lot of our podcast audience will have, and even most of our video audience, frankly, will have consumed this show, Georgia could have added a member to its 2025 class. The tight end, Ethan Barbour. Ethan, of course, has visited Georgia to a couple of games already here this season, so his tie to Georgia seems to be pretty strong. Todd Hartley typically gets who he wants when it comes to this position. Georgia's already got a tight end committed for the class of 2025, but having Barbour to pair with him would certainly be a nice thought when you think about Elias Williams, what he brings to the table. Our state right now incredibly deep when it comes to tight ends. So, Jeff, that's kind of the backdrop here for the Barbour decision a little bit later on today. How do you think this one shakes out? And maybe a better question, what should Georgia fans know about the guy, Ethan Barbour, who's getting ready to make his choice?
Yeah, guys, good morning. Happy Friday. I think there's two statements I could make that would pretty much nutshell what you're looking at here with Ethan Barbour. He's at Alpharetta High, of course, number 4 tight end in the country. But the two things that really caught my eye while covering him for the last couple of years is, first of all, He had a game early this year, Brandon, where he caught, I think, 6 balls for 215 yards and 4 touchdowns in a quarter. And yet, sometimes, if you think about that playmaking tight end, the guy that wants the ball, remember that Keyshawn Johnson, just throw me the ball? He's actually been guilty of coming over the sidelines after a series and asking his coordinators and play callers to call some run plays because he wants to bang on the guy. He wants to bang, and he wants to bang, and he wants to bang, and he wants to bump on the guy that's been guarding him because he wants to get active in the run game. This is a very experienced tight end. And the second thing I really like about the Ethan Barbour story is, man, this is a family that values education. I think his mother works in financial investments for Merrill Lynch. His dad was in the military, but also holds an MBA from Duke. His sister is at Vanderbilt. She was almost a valedictorian in high school, her class. So this is a guy, you start checking all the boxes. A lot of these boxes are going to be checked, and maybe there's some boxes that are going to be created that you didn't even really know you needed to check, but you sure like to see a check there with whoever winds up with Ethan Barbour.
I tell you what, let's do this. Let's put Jeff on hold. Let's see if we can get a better signal for Jeff. It sounds like some folks are having a little bit of a hard time hearing what he's saying today, so let's see if we can get that squared away. And while we're waiting on that, Michael, I'll let you help me out with that. While we're waiting on that, I'll kind of follow up on Jeff's saying there because I do think that's really good information, is that I believe Barbour is already listed around 230 pounds right now, and the willing blocker, obviously tight ends love to catch the football, right? That's one of the reasons they play tight end, because they want to be involved in the offense, and Georgia certainly recruited plenty of tight ends who felt very strongly about that. And yet in a time in which, and I've kind of touched on this, but a time in which it seems like the athletic tight end is so fashionable right now, especially when it comes to Georgia high school football. A lot of these top teams have the very athletic tight end on display. I think that Barbour, while he's not certainly shying away from any kind of level of athleticism for a player his size, is a guy that I think kind of has the potential to be a little bit more of a traditional tight end. Jeff, is that kind of, to follow up on what you're saying about the willingness of him as a blocker, the desire, the request to be a blocker for the running game? Do you see Barbour as a little bit more of the traditional attached tight end at the line of scrimmage as opposed to some of the less traditional, more, hybrid-style receivers that Georgia oftentimes recruit this position? Is that the best way to evaluate what Barbour is, a little bit more traditional from that spot?
Yeah, pretty much dead on. I think he's an all-around tight end. He's a guy that's not going to have any deficiencies in his game. Or Brandon, you and I both know, we've said this on your program a lot. Sometimes Georgia gets this big guy that really hasn't been a tight end yet. He's just got the skills and the body type to put on 30 pounds, and he looks more like a Jimmy Graham in high school than he does a Brock Bowers per se. And I think Barbour's a guy that could fit that mold. I think the story I was trying to tell is some playmakers that have the ball in their hands that can make a lot of plays, they come over the sidelines and say, give me the ball. Well, Ethan Barbour came over the sidelines and said, give me a block. Like, he wanted to block his guy. He wanted to get physical. He wanted to bang on the defense in the run game. And you have that, and you have the other component there with Ethan Barbour, which is an incredible in education level. Like, his mother works for Merrill Lynch in the financial sector. He has a sister that's at Vanderbilt who was almost a valedictorian. And then his father, Eric, he served in the military, and yet he also has an MBA from Duke. So you're looking at a prospect here that you're going to look down the things about what you want to see in a tight end, and Ethan Barbour is going to check every single one. There won't be any on-the-job training blocking on the perimeter run game when it comes to Ethan Barbour at the college level.
A much better signal, Jeff. I appreciate that. A story that you wrote at DawgNation this week that I thought was really interesting involves Joseph Jonah-Janye, Justin Williams, 2 high school teammates from Texas who've been in Georgia recently, kind of hanging out with Dylan Raiola. And I love the bond that these guys seem to be forming with each other. Now, first of all, I like Jonah-Janye and Williams as players. Who wouldn't? But in a day and age in which Georgia recruits more nationally, a lot of the top programs are just national recruiters these days. Georgia's obviously very much in that mold. You kind of wonder, well, is it more difficult for recruits to get to know each other and feel like they have friendships with each other, given the fact that in many cases they may live hundreds of miles apart? But it sounds like Raiola and important players on defense like Williams and Jonah-Janye, it sounds like they have developed a pretty good bond here, which I do think speaks to the possible connection of this 2024 class. And given the fact that Georgia put so much value on connection, the speed with which these guys might acclimate themselves into UGA's culture, given the fact they've already formed what looks to be a pretty nice, tight-knit culture amongst themselves already.
Brendan, you know that I'm sure everyone saw the SEC Network special where they were behind the scenes with Georgia game day at South Carolina. You remember the extended version of that trailer that showed up on social media, not just the Kirby part, but the part with like Cedric Von Prawn and Javon Bullard speaking to the team beforehand? You want to have a player-led team, and you already see things like this with this class. Raiola had more than done his yeoman's work on the recruiting trail, recruiting Jonah Ajonye and Williams to Georgia. That was even back when he was in Arizona. But you see this, in the way it just came together, it feels so organic and authentic. Joseph Jonah Ajonye and Justin Williams last week were on the bye for Oak Ridge High School. They came into Georgia early because they wanted to go to the South Carolina game. They were in Georgia. I think their flight got in at like 3 o'clock, 2 o'clock in Atlanta. And Dylan invited them to say, hey, come watch us play. Come watch Buford play. And their families, they showed up at the Buford game. They were there to support Dylan Raiola. And you saw the families interact after the game. I mean, first of all, somebody got word that 2 5-star Georgia commits were in the house at Buford, and all of a sudden Williams and Jonah Ajonye had an autograph line where they were signing everything under the sun in the third quarter. But when the game was over, they took pictures. They were talking to each other. You saw like the way the parents and the families interacted with Raiola. They really appreciate this young man for everything he is, besides spinning a football 70 yards and layering the ball over defenses in a way that we don't see a lot of Golden Boy 5-star quarterbacks do. They just wanted to build the bond. They wanted to start to support one another and get that chemistry going before they got to Athens. And you love to see that, especially for two guys in Justin Williams and Jonah Ajonye, who had never, ever been to Stanford for a game day before. And they came away mesmerized by Stanford, as they should have. So
I'm excited about tonight because you mentioned Dylan Raiola. We get a chance to broadcast him on Peachtree TV, something I'm very much looking forward to, both because I'm excited about being, on hand with him, but also I'm looking forward to kind of showcasing him for Georgia fans. And it seems like, Jeff, and I know you've seen Raiola in person a couple of times already this season, it seems like he's settling in pretty well. There's the Buford quarterback here in the state of Georgia. Those stats that some folks had asked some questions about early in the season, seems like that stat line is kind of rounding into a little bit more of the form we kind of expected it to have. And for those folks who maybe haven't had the pleasure and the privilege that you've already had of seeing Raiola in person a couple of times, and they're planning on tuning into Peachtree TV, which certainly I appreciate if they will do, what will they see from Raiola tonight on television as Buford gets ready to take on Marietta?
Yeah, Brandon, I'm happy for you, man. Not only do you get to see a Georgia commitment live and call the game, but you get to see the one with the highest Q rating. It was unfortunate that I saw this week that one service had dropped Raiola down to a 4-star, when I think what they're doing there is that they just don't see the elite movement trait that maybe other guys do have in terms of Raiola. And all he's done this year on the field, Brandon, is move around. Like, you need to get your nifty, syrupy scramble calls lined up and together like ducks in a row for tonight, because he's really shown me a lot with throwing on the move, with having to adjust under fire, getting rid of the ball quickly. He's picked up the Buford offense well. There's a lot of heartwarming, feel-good stories I could tell you about what Raiola does behind the scenes, Wednesday nights, Sunday nights, on Tuesdays and Thursday mornings. He's at the field at Buford High School working out at like 5, 6 a.m. When the coaches come into the parking lot ready for another day of work, they see Raiola coming off the practice field dripped in sweat with his boombox that he'd been working out with his younger brother, working on those agility, working on those movement skills. And whatever you want to say, this is kind of the signature recruit of the class. He's still the number 1 overall recruit for a couple of services. I think the composite still has him now as the number 4 overall player in the country. I think Raiola is an anchor piece. I think he's a franchise piece for any class, a centerpiece, and not only for how well he spins the ball. Brennan, you'll marvel seeing it live, how he can just push the ball 40, 50 yards, and it doesn't look like he's got any strain to that at all. But the way he celebrates with his team, the way he does the little things, even stuff that the cameras won't catch, that's the stuff I look for, and that's the stuff where Dylan Raiola needs to be rated as highly in the country as anybody for all those little things he does as a football player to make the team better.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of stuff matters to me, right? I mean, I think it's been an interesting test that Raiola's had to pass this year, and the sense that I get from being around Buford a little bit this week is that Raiola's passed this test well of you step onto a program culture at Buford that expects to win a state championship. They're a nationally ranked team. Now, Dillon himself is a nationally ranked recruit, but Buford as a program already has a lot going for it. There are a lot of alpha dog type players within that program, and how you become a part of that culture, how you get accepted into that, I think is a little bit of a challenge for a quarterback because, quarterbacks especially have to, form a bond with their teammates. We've seen examples of some pretty big-time college football teams here this year. You see the quarterback get sacked, and guess what? Nobody's walking over there to pick him up. Nobody's walking over there to help him dust himself off. There's dissension and has been on the field with some of the top teams, at least a top team that I can think of here right now in college football this year about who played quarterback at least for one game anyway. I'll let people figure out who I'm talking about. But in the case of Raiola, the sense that I get from the stuff that you've reported, from having a chance to kind of be around a little bit myself, and what I believe we'll be able to show you on TV tonight is that Raiola, ahead of next year, when he has to try to do all of this at Georgia, which is an entirely different challenge, has seemingly ingrained himself pretty well in this very talented Buford program's culture. And I think that kind of speaks pretty well for his ability to travel across country and just make fast friends, which, quarterbacks need to be popular. And it seems like Dillon's done a pretty good job of doing that.
Yeah, Brandon, next time I would encourage folks to watch a game, whether it's college level or high school player, watch when they make a big play. Watch when they catch a touchdown. Watch and see how many of the teammates come and celebrate with the guy, or whether the young man has to trot over to the sideline mostly by himself. I think the one thing we need to make sure we say here about Raiola is this was a check mark for him as well. This was because let's face it, Brandon, the concerns on Raiola, if there were any coming into the season, were how would he adjust to big boy Georgia football? How is that different than Arizona football? How is that different than the Texas high school football he played as a sophomore? And the other thing is there is a steep learning curve where basically he shows up at Buford in mid-July and has to learn an offense, has to win a job, has to take the reins of a team that I think, Brandon, by my last count, there was 11 or 12 guys that either have a Georgia offer or will have a Georgia offer on that team, much less commitments to other schools like North Carolina, Michigan. I can go on, but that's a loaded program. It's one of the prestige programs in the state of Georgia. And for him to not only swim and keep his head above water, but right now he's doing the 200-meter individual medley with all the things he does for Buford, I think that says a lot.
I think it does there as well. Another story you had this week at DawgNation.com involves, guys who were at Athens the last week for the big game against South Carolina. One of those, a guy we talked about in our show last week, Makai Boro, the, I think, outstanding nose man from Creekside, who I believe is a prime Georgia target here right now. Based on what he told you, sounds like he really enjoyed the experience in Athens there last week. So let me use him as a peg to kind of broaden it all out. What's your sense of the response that Georgia fans, or not say Georgia fans, but the Georgia recruits gave to being around the Georgia fans and the environment in place for the game against South Carolina? How do you think that was received last week from guys like Boro and others who were there?
Yeah, they kind of basically were amazed by it, Brandon, and they gushed about it. And it's kind of funny. They all said, it's sort of the same things we heard from the Tennessee game last year, how when it started raining, the fans got louder, it got more exciting, it got more fun. Somehow the ponchos added a lot of interest to it. But, if you had to compare the two, I would say that environment, that atmosphere for Carolina was probably like maybe a 7 or an 8 in that same rain environment where Tennessee was a 9 or 10. But the recruits that were on hand, they still loved it. They were still impressed. They couldn't wait to get to Athens and play. I think with Makai Boro, you see a guy that, I'll be honest, Brandon, there's 3 players left in the class that I would probably track and say major targets at this time. One of those is Aiden Breland. He was there as well. He was kind of taken in by Stanford again when he was just at Georgia for G-Day back in April. I think he's the primary remaining target for Georgia in this class. I think Florida's doing a great job with L.J. McCray, who's gotten a 5-star ranking from On3.com over the last week. And then there's Makai Boro. And Makai told me he was watching the game, and Kirby Smart told him at the game that he needs somebody like him. He needs a big anchor in the middle because, frankly, Brennan, you think of guys like John Atkins for Georgia or Terrence Cody for Alabama or Jordan Davis, And maybe Jamal Jarrett now, he's just a freshman at Georgia learning his way, but there's not a lot of 6'5", 365-pound humans on this earth, especially that play football, especially that can move as well as Mekhi Barrow did. I remember hearing a story where Florida came in, and they already really liked him, but then they saw him in practice, and they basically treated him like Aaron Donald 2.0 with how hard they recruited him. And that's how they initially won the commitment from Mekhi Barrow. And he told me he basically made a commitment to get the commitment process to stop. He wanted all the attention and all the calls and all the pitches to slow down. That's why he made his commitment in the first place. There was a really big question that Trey Scott asked Mekhi Barrow after his visit, and he says, can you see yourself at Georgia? Can you see yourself there? And one of the things Mekhi told me is he looked out on the field and he saw great Georgia players playing defensive line, but he didn't see a big anchor like he is. He didn't see that body type like he is. And he told Travion Scott he could see himself at Georgia. I asked him that question this week point blank. I was like, you had a couple of days to think about it. Can you really see yourself thriving at Georgia? And he said he could, and he said he knows Kirby Smart's program has what he needs to take him to the next level. That all sounds very encouraging. He's also going to take visits to Auburn, maybe Ole Miss, likely Michigan, and he's going to make his final decision public on early signing day in December. He's going to take this one a lot slower, but what Georgia did by getting that first visit out of the box, they were already the number 2 school in his recruitment over the summer. I think Georgia's in a good spot right now with Mekhi Barrow.
I want to finish with this. You heard about Juan Gaston this week out of Westlake, good offensive lineman, and it gives me a chance to reiterate something I believe we also talked about last week, that the 2025 class for Georgia is going to be important here in state. It's a real opportunity to win with some big-time, big in-state guys in a way that maybe the last couple of years Georgia hasn't always done. Now, the Georgia recruiting apparatus is fine, and it's been great. It's been elite, but it's an opportunity that exists for Georgia in-state here this year, or I should say for the following cycle. And it's line of scrimmage guys in particular that I think are going to be so important here. You know, the Juan Gastons who you wrote about. You may put Josh Petty in that category. You may put Cortez Smith in that category out of Parkview. Justice Terry, who's already committed. Elijah Griffin, who probably is going to be the guy we end up talking the most about, I would say, if I had to predict over the next 12 months. Griffin's probably the guy we end up talking the most about here in this space when it comes to UGA recruiting. Jeff, your story about Gaston, that's what it makes me think of is that not only is the 2025 class going to be important for Georgia in-state, it's the line of scrimmage, both lines, offensive and defensive line, where I think that's going to be really, I think, a real focal point of what this next cycle is going to look like. Do you agree with that? And I guess how do you think Gaston fits into all of that?
Yeah, I'm going to agree with that, Brennan, when we're talking about this in 2027. I think the way you win football games is with the big athletic men up front that can move. I've always going to subscribe to the theory that the most important players on the field is number 1, the quarterback, number 2 is the defensive linemen that affect the quarterback, and number 3 are the offensive linemen that protect the quarterback. And Georgia makes no bones that that's where they want to make their hay on in the SEC physical league. It's still a run game league when you need to win a game in the fourth quarter. And I think Georgia, what they're doing there, it's kind of intriguing. You see Gaston. One of the things that caught my eye that I knew people would like to see is Gaston, whose dad played basketball at Georgia Tech when Tech really had some strong teams in the 90s in basketball. And he's 6'8", he's 335, Brennan. And he's the type of player that you walk out on his field, you can see him from like 50, 60 yards away. 6'8", 335, just looks like that. But then this week when I walked up on him, I saw him initially working out with the lineman, but eventually I'm looking at him, and he's with a kick team, and he's with a kicking coach, and he's kicking extra points and field goals. And I'm like, literally, like, pick the metaphor. I'm like, great googly moogly, what's going on there? 6'8", 335, and he's not even doing the straight-up Steve Crumley type kicking that old Dog fans will remember, but he's doing that adjacent kicking when he steps to the side and then he comes through and he swings the leg. And he was making a lot of his extra points. Turns out they have a depth issue at kicker at Westlake where there's an injury and they don't know who they're going to turn to. So before the Southwest DeKalb game earlier this year, Brandon, he just walks up and says, hey, man, I can kick. Let me do it. And he booms a 40-yarder in pregame warm-ups to say, yeah, I can do it. And you know, Brendan, you see all these kids with the soccer players that kick, and they've got their special kicking shoes. And Juan Gaston's got his big old boy size 16 battleships, and he starts cranking out 40-yarders and kicking extra points in practice. I'm just saying this. I don't see 6'8", 335 doing that on a field ever. It shows you he's got his daddy's feet, basketball player. He's a real athlete. I saw him post-practice conditioning, Brandon, after he ran up the whole day during practice in full pads. He went to one sideline and then back again. He did it in about 45 seconds. He led the bigs. He did it again. He did it in about 47 seconds. He led the bigs. And this is the biggest man on the field. He's also the kicker, who's also a top 10 offensive tackle prospect in the country. I think it's intriguing. You see on3.com. They actually have rated Gaston as a tackle. I guess their evaluators there see him maybe in the Xavier Truss mode early in his college career, and you can see that a little bit. But I see a young man that's massive. If you want to find a body type that can fill the Amarius Mims locker down the road at Georgia, I think Juan Gaston would be an ideal candidate for that.
Jeff, great stuff. Can't wait to see you between the hedges tomorrow in Athens. Appreciate your time here today, and we'll look forward to talking to you again on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger very soon.
Hey, man, have yourself a good weekend and enjoy the call tonight with Raiola and the Wolves.
Thank you, Jeff. Looking forward to it.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, we have a lot to do for our SEC Through as we're cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. So I want to jump right to it. And by the way, speaking of Royal Caribbean, I hope you'll jump right into a great Royal Caribbean cruise vacation opportunity here as we head towards holidays in 2023 or early 2024 there as well. There is so much fun stuff on tap. 3 big announcements as far as it relates to 2024. Debut of Icon of the Seas in January, largest cruise ship ever constructed. That's going to be amazing. But timed perfectly for the debut of Icon of the Seas, also some brand new improvements, if it could have even been improved upon, when it comes to Perfect Day Coco Cay. Kind of expanding, creating more opportunities, fun things. The experience when you think about Perfect Day Coco Cay is just unlike anything else. And so when you're on a brand new cruise ship like Icon of the Seas, you also get a brand new experience as it relates to Perfect Day Coco Cay too. Every single thing that Royal Caribbean can do to make all of this bigger and better. It just seems like they're finding new ways to do that all the time, which is really, really cool. And don't forget as well, think about new ships, about the debut in July of 2024 of Utopia of the Seas. It's an Oasis-class ship, the newest in the Oasis class of vessels, and it's going to be sailing out of Port Canaveral. 3 and 4 night sailing. So for those of you that maybe say the 7-night cruise doesn't really match my schedule right now, I like the weekend cruises or the cruises that are a little shorter, less than a week. Guess what? You get a chance in 2024 to leave out of Port Canaveral, the most convenient port to us, and you get a chance to do that on a very, very large and a brand new ship, Utopia of the Seas. What a fun experience that's going to be. Jessica Slater can help you with all this. Great travel agent. Give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. Also, email her if you want to, jslater@dreamvacations.com. All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to roll through all of the big games and kind of what I'm kind of bringing back as the Showdown Saturday type vernacular that we have maybe used in the past. I want to roll through all of these. I like Oregon over Colorado on Saturday. Big spread in this game, in excess of 3 touchdowns. But here's what it comes down to for me. As fun as Colorado has been thus far, and they have been a blast to watch, you can't deny that, nor can you deny the way in which the college football world has been transfixed by them. They're getting massive, massive television ratings week after week. This game against Oregon is going to be no different. And they have been thrilling in the way they've been winning these games, including last week against Colorado State. But the issue you run into here is an Oregon team that, from a talent perspective, is just a very different animal than anything that Colorado's faced thus far this season. And who knows that more than anybody else? Deion Sanders. There's been none of this, this is personal for us. And, there's been very little fanfare from Deion this week. Talked about the respect that he had for Oregon. There was some chatter this week about whether or not he knew Dan Lanning's name or not. I don't know that he does or he doesn't. He certainly didn't mention Lanning by name, but had respect for the Oregon team. So I think that Deion knows with what Oregon's capable of doing on defense, with the Lanning defense, they could be in some trouble. Keep this in mind. For all the great stuff that Shedeur Sanders is doing right now, Colorado's also last in the nation in terms of sack yards allowed. They're 130th out of 133 teams in total number of sacks allowed. This is not a good offensive line. They can't run the ball at all, and Shedeur Sanders, at the rate they're currently going, is not going to finish the season. I don't say that with any great pleasure because I love watching Shedeur Sanders play, but you can't get sacked as much as Shedeur's getting sacked and survive a year at the rate this is going. The inability to block up front is going to doom them against Oregon. Plus, two other things. I think Oregon likes the platform provided to them by Colorado. I think they use it to their advantage. In other words, they're going to soak in some of this national attention. And this won't be talked about publicly, but privately it's true. If coaches have a chance to tack on the extra score on Deion, they're going to do it. Deion has cultivated a lot of attention, and right now he's making coaching look easy. That's an insult to men who've devoted their life to this profession because it's not easy for anybody. And if they have a chance to make it seem not quite so easy for Deion this year, they're going to do it, whether that's fair or not. That's the way that it plays out. I like Oregon, and I like them big against Colorado on Saturday. The big national game is Notre Dame against Ohio State. My pick here is Ohio State. Some of this is on the basis of a hunch. The hunch here built on the idea that a couple of the wins for Notre Dame this year, perhaps if you dig a little deeper, not quite as impressive as they look. Notre Dame blew out Navy week 0. Most of us watched that because it was the only game on at the time. You obviously know, though, this isn't your father's Navy team anymore. They don't even really run the option quite as well as they used to. They're just not nearly as good a football team, very small. Notre Dame pushed them around all day long. Navy's also lost again since then to Memphis, so blowing out Navy, not as big a deal maybe as it would have been years ago. Plus the game against NC State, where Notre Dame also seemed to assert itself a little bit. You know, that kind of comes in a situation where you watch that game a little closer. I don't know that the actual per-play story was as dominant as the final score perhaps looked there on that. The one thing that gives me pause about this is, the one thing that Notre Dame is doing better than you might realize, they're running the football right now. Audric Estime is a name that's probably currently a little bit less famous than Sam Hartman, the transfer quarterback. But if I'm wrong and Notre Dame pulls the slight upset at home on Saturday night, it's the presence of the Notre Dame running game. It's the presence of Estime in particular that probably makes that happen. Ultimately, though, my expectation is that Ohio State wins here and then emerges from the first 4 weeks of the season as now the most hyped team in the sport, more so than probably Texas has been or Florida State upon beating LSU or even Colorado through all the things that have gone on over there. The team that's going to be lauded and praised the most after this weekend, I believe, will end up being Ohio State. Now, is that well-earned, or is it just the kind of thing we do because of a big win in a primetime moment that everybody's watching? We'll have to see about that. But I do expect Saturday night to be a pretty good one for Ohio State. I expect Kyle McCord to kind of assert himself as the Ohio State quarterback. Is he as good as C.J. Stroud was a year ago? The suspicions we have right now, probably not, but are the Ohio State receivers, Marvin Harrison Jr. Included, are they as good as ever? They certainly are, and that's probably a difference in this game. Fun one, though, on tap with Ohio State and Notre Dame. Moving on, Alabama and Ole Miss. I don't have some sort of like really keen, brilliant handicap on this. It simply, to me, comes down to this. Lane Kiffin right now is not behaving like a coach who thinks he's going to win. Oftentimes, the oldest and dirtiest trick in the book is you talk trash before a game when you don't think you're going to have the opportunity to talk trash after a game. Lane Kiffin is seemingly addicted to attention and cultivating attention. And so this week he's been out there talking a lot, stirring it up about who's calling the plays for Alabama defensively between Kevin Steele and Tavares Robinson. And I suspect that Kiffin's probably right about that. I don't believe he'd just make this up out of whole cloth. I suspect he's probably right. But it's the kind of weird peripheral issue, kind of sidebar type thing that you only get into when you don't love how your team is perhaps going to perform on the field. Plus, there was also the Taylor Swift lyric on social media, which was sort of taken as a gesture that Alabama's castle might be tumbling or falling down or whatever the Swift lyric is. This is the kind of thing that a serious-minded coach just doesn't do, and I don't think of Lane Kiffin as a serious man. I don't think he thinks he can win. That's why he's making all these jokes and joking gestures prior to the game. Alabama is now back to Jalen Milroe. The most interesting team off the field all year long has been the Crimson Tide, and not for good reasons. Nick Saban embarrassed himself when he tried to, this week, make the case that the reason why they did not start Milroe against South Florida was because they had promised playing time to both Ty Simpson and to Tyler Buckner. This isn't Little League left field. Not everybody gets a turn to be the Alabama quarterback. Obviously, Nick Saban knows that. He was lying to all of us when he said what he said. But Milroe is back inserted, probably should have been the starting quarterback the entire time. He's not good, but he's the best they have. They will run with him. They will throw deep because those are the two things that he can do. He can't throw intermediate routes at all. Alabama would be better off not even trying them. But running quarterback, throwing deep occasionally, that's enough to beat Ole Miss. Alabama will win. I don't know what that means for them the rest of the season. Keep in mind, Their adjusted win total right now is now just 8.5, depending on which sports book you might be looking at. So this is an Alabama team that would seem to be in the midst of a bit of a free fall here, but I don't think that's going to happen on Saturday. I believe Alabama wins. The line has been about a touchdown. I think they will cover that. Auburn and Texas A&M, we've talked about that a lot this week, just from the perspective of it is who Georgia plays next week, and I stand by what I've been saying. I believe this is a football game that Auburn can win. I think it will at least be closer than the experts think, if not an outright Auburn win. The thing that will give you some pause here is the fact that the quarterback advantage is clearly on the side of Texas A&M. I don't love their offense. I don't know that Bobby Petrino has gotten the freedom yet to do what he wants to do, but Connor Wegman is a good quarterback. He's clearly better than the Peyton Thorne, Robbie Ashford combination, whatever that ends up being for Auburn. But the Tigers also this past offseason went out to the transfer portal, and they brought in a lot more than just Thorne. They got some veteran players from the portal, and this is the kind of game where I think those players can make a difference. Here's the other thing, too. And I know a lot of people don't like Hugh Freeze. They think of him as, well, they think of him as a lot of things, to be honest with you. But the sense that I'm getting coming out of the Plains right now is it seems like this team is bonding around Freeze pretty well, and it seems like the opinion that people have of Freeze when they're working with him with the football team, perhaps a little bit different than the caricature that gets drawn of him, sometimes for the right reasons because of some bad stuff that Hugh is alleged to have done in his past. But it seems like this Auburn team right now is kind of rallying around Hugh Freeze a little bit here at the moment. That's clearly not what's going on at Texas A&M. I believe that right now Jimbo Fisher looks like a coach who could be fired at season's end. So given the fact that Freeze seems like a coach on the come-up and Jimbo Fisher looks to be looking for a soft spot to land, I like Auburn here, and I believe they could win this game. Outside the SEC, just for a moment, the difference for me in the Florida State-Clemson game comes down to the Florida State wide receivers. It's not just Keon Coleman, who, by the way, has really not had a huge game since the game against LSU to begin the season. You know, Johnny Wilson, I think, who had a couple drops against LSU, is actually a really good receiver, too. Clemson used to have receivers like this. Now they don't. They also don't have the kind of defense anymore that can stop these kinds of wide receivers either. I believe that's enough to get Florida State the win against Clemson on Saturday. I think Clemson's actually probably a little bit slightly underrated now because we all watched them lose to Duke on Labor Day night. They've played better against lesser competition since then, but this is a huge step up in weight class to have to face Florida State. I just think right now in key spots, certainly at quarterback, wide receiver, Florida State just has better athletes overall. But keep in mind, history is working against the Seminoles. They've lost 7 straight to Clemson and have covered the spread in just 2 of those 7 games. And then quickly I'll give you this. There are so many good games here this weekend that almost a few other top 25 games almost like completely fly under the radar and don't get noticed at all. So let me just briefly mention Utah-UCLA is probably a better game than you realize. It seems like Cam Rising is probably maybe going to come back for Utah. You know, do your own research on that, I guess. But it seems like Rising could be coming back. But the real story here, I believe, could be Dante Moore, who seems like he is the best quarterback on the UCLA roster. And Moore, the freshman, may get his coming out party in a ranked matchup against Utah. That should be a lot of fun. And then for Penn State, who's kind of been a little bit of an offseason darling, and some people even think that could be a playoff caliber team in a pretty deep Big Ten East. We haven't seen much from them yet. They beat West Virginia week 1, beat Illinois last week. Did not really play a great game. Brett Bielema's Illini teams can make teams have to play ugly from time to time. Penn State sort of won ugly a little bit last week against Illinois, and now they play another sort of thick-ankled Big Ten team like Iowa here this week. It's about time, if Penn State's going to be as good as people think they can be, it's about time for Penn State to look like Penn State. So in a battle of ranked foes, Iowa and Penn State, we'll see if James Franklin's charges can do just that. And for now, we'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Let me give you a quick shout out here before we do some golden shoes. It's our friends at Mr. Electric, because if you need electric panel or wiring repair, or perhaps some EV charging stations, no matter what you need, you can rest assured that one of our expert technicians from Mr. Electric can handle it for you. No project too big or too small. So rest assured that you can count on Mr. Electric for outstanding installation, clear communication, and honest pricing. That all sounds really good to me. And the good news is it's just a $29 dispatch fee. So visit MrElectricAtlanta.com. That's MrElectricAtlanta.com to find your local Mr. Electric. All right, so fun golden shoes here this week. What do you say we fire up the fight song? We'll get ready to play those here on the way out the door. Starting with our first one here today. We'll show it to you on the screen here. So Georgia on Tap just sent this to me. Been a little bit of chatter against Josh Heupel, the Tennessee coach, here as of late. Apparently, Joel Klatt, the Fox Sports analyst, goes on TV talking about the fact that he thinks right now that Tennessee is a program having a hard time matching the success that it had a year ago. So Georgia on Tap sent the article to me saying, "Hoo boy, this is a DawgNation Daily segment written all over it. I like how he says it's hard to have good seasons year after year. In the case of Tennessee, they may be finding that out right now. So Georgia on Tap for making fun of Josh Heupel. We will give him a golden shoe for that." Speaking of battles with opposing fans, our buddy Frankie Fibonacci is always battling with one of our resident Alabama fans about who's got the real RBU. And Frankie pointing out that right now, top 5 running backs in the NFL, you see 3 names from the University of Georgia. Of course, Nick Chubb now injured, but that just means James Cook and DeAndre Swift, they'll have to carry the load in honor of Georgia as Nick Chubb deals with his injury recovery. We certainly wish them well as they do that. Frankie Fibonacci will give you a golden shoe for that, too. And then finally, this may only be funny to me, but Nick Saban, I made this one myself. So Nick Saban was on the Pat McAfee show, as he is every week. And like the McAfee show is like a very different vibe, right? McAfee wears the sleeveless shirt. He stands up. There's a lot of yelling and screaming, a lot of, forced laughter. And it's just a kind of an intentionally relaxed vibe. Saban always looks like he's broadcasting from a tomb. I mean, it's like the lobby of like the oldest Ritz-Carlton you've ever been to in your life. The wood-paneled walls, everything else. It's dark as night in there. But it's also very studious and very professional. Well, I thought when Chris Cole, the new Georgia linebacker commit, when he joined Jeff Sentell for Before the Hedges on Saturday, not to be Mr. Room Raider guy here for a moment, but I thought that Chris Cole's backdrop absolutely dwarfed Saban's. Saban's taken a lot of L's as of late. I think he got beat in the backdrop game by Cole this week. Saban's got the office, the books, the, rich mahogany, leather-bound books type thing going on. He's trying to be, anchorman Ron Burgundy. But look at Cole there with the brick facade on the wall, bookshelf, books well-placed there. I feel like Chris Cole beats Saban on the background. Like I said, this may be funny only to me, but for some reason these two backgrounds kind of reminded me of each other. Look at the lighting that Cole has. No such lighting for Saban. So I think Saban takes another L there, and we'll give you a golden shoe there on that there as well. How about our Gator Hater Countdown? 36 days from now, Georgia back in Jacksonville, beating Florida again. That's always good news. Y'all have a great weekend. Enjoy the game tomorrow. We'll see you after the game for our DawgNation post-game show. You can join us via Zoom. You can join us in person in the UGA bookstore, and you can just watch, which is always a great thing there as well. After the game, and then back here Monday for DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We will look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. Did I say all that right? Yeah, I think it did. So we're always happy to have them, always happy to have you. We're going to dive in and get all your comments. I'm going to start on DawgNation.com because I had a little bit of an issue with comments there a little earlier. There you see the little wink from Carson Beck, which is always a lot of fun. We're going to start with your comments on DawgNation.com because we had a little bit of an issue there earlier, and then we'll roll through the rest of these there as well. Let's see what else. Trying to figure out. So the subject has come up at DawgNation.com. I saw some of this a little earlier. The Urban Meyer thing from earlier this week when he was on, one of those Ohio State themed podcasts, and he was talking about the Georgia strength of schedule, basically saying you're supposed to be penalized for that. This is what you need to know. Urban Meyer as a way of trying to re-ingratiate himself to Ohio State fans because he's literally been shunned by the rest of the football world. The only dot on the map anywhere where Urban Meyer is still a big deal is in Columbus, Ohio. That's just a fact that he's been completely rejected from the NFL because of the embarrassing chapter there with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Most everybody else has cable TV or the internet in some form or fashion. They are aware of that failure. They're aware of Meyer's personal failings too. And so, therefore, most people have rightly rejected Meyer as any kind of cogent voice when it comes to the sport. But in Columbus, he's still a big deal because, he won a championship there and they haven't had much success since then. So they cling to that tightly. And Meyer is basically saying Georgia should be penalized for, their schedule, which tells you everything you need to know about the psyche of Buckeye fans right now. This is Meyer, in his mind, his best way of getting on the good side of Ohio State fans again, because he needs some fan base somewhere to laud him, because it seems like that's something that he needs to be kind of reaffirmed, every handful of years. He needs some fan base somewhere to laud him. And so, therefore, he says, hey, penalize Georgia. Beat him in a boardroom. Let a bunch of guys get together and gals get together in Grapevine, Texas, I believe that's what it's called, where the College Football Playoff Committee gets, huddle up in a group and decide to keep Georgia out of the playoff because of that schedule. That tells you everything you need to know right now, is that Ohio State's begging for a boardroom to do what the Buckeyes cannot do on the field, or at least could not do in 2022. That tells you everything you need to know right there. Bill saying the Ohio State strength of schedule is 98, Dogs 106th, Michigan 100, outside of the top 100, USC there as well. I believe that was coming from the Sagarin ratings. Yeah, so there you go. There you go. Randy Hall shouting out Nitro Tuggle. Sounds like he had a really good stat line. I'd seen some online chatter about that. You'd love to see that. Julian Harris says he's looking to see Georgia fans create an environment that's so great that it makes Trent Dilfer forget he even played in a Super Bowl. That's fun to think about, Julian. I like that too. Hayes Calloway, who the other day gave me a great gift, one of those 2022 National Champion Coke bottles. I had not had one of those. He joins us here in the Dog Nation comments section. Hayes, I really did appreciate that. I have been very, very blessed to get a lot of really cool gifts from so many of y'all. So many of you have just been so nice to send me things or share with me in person. And, I collect all those things at home, and I've got this entire collection of stuff that are things that just y'all have given me. And we've talked about some of that stuff in the past. So I am very grateful of that, including that Coke bottle that Hayes sent. Let's see what else. Nate Dogg says, how many quarters do you think Beck will play? I think probably a pretty good bit. I don't think they're going to be in a rush to get other quarterbacks into the game. Now, I'm guessing they probably want to see something from another, if not both, of the other quarterbacks. But in the Ball State game, we only saw those quarterbacks play in just one series each. So I am thinking that there is a similar scenario in place on Saturday where the game mostly belongs to Beck. And if they can get somebody or both the other somebodies into the game, they will. But this is a game, I believe, in which Georgia mostly wants to get the ball, to involve Carson Beck. DT says he still has his 1980 National Championship Coke bottle. So for a long time, it seems like at one point in time, everybody had the 1980 Coke bottles. They've never been worth all that much money because Coke just makes so many of them. Everybody had the 1980 bottle. There was like a Coca-Cola tray, like a tray, like a tin, aluminum, whatever it is, tray from 1980 that I think was kind of worth something at one point in time. The Coke bottles have never been all that monetarily valuable because everybody had one. But for a long period of time, I actually did not have one. I don't know. I did have them, and somehow they got lost or whatever else. And I just for a long time I didn't have one. Now I am now in possession of one. So I am very thankful to have that. But for a weird period of my life, I actually did not have one. DT's also got the tray there as well. Yeah, so I kind of remember that. West GA Dog fan wondering about Jackson Muschamp getting some playing time. Maybe one of these days we'll see that. I think that Jackson's there working on his coaching degree, if I had to guess. Let's see what else. And what a great experience that is. The other Muschamp's a good quarterback, too. They're at, Baylor High School in Chattanooga. Vanderbilt commit, I believe. He's a good quarterback, too. Let us see over here. Paul Moon says, I'm sure if there was 1980 memorabilia, I'm sure my dad has it somewhere. Yeah, I kind of remember, it's like, I just sort of remember that as a kid. It's like you go to people's houses and they had like the sort of 1980 style memorabilia on display. Like my grandfather had a lot of, some of it was even predating a lot of that, but just like really fun, cool memorabilia. And I just love that old school Georgia stuff. I just do. I mean, I like old stuff anyway, and the old school Georgia memorabilia stuff, I just love it. I love it. Let's see what else. Nature Gator says that I see Mike's anti-Napier rant. No, I missed that one yesterday. But I'm sure it was spirited, I'm sure. Alan Hampton says, we have the best uniforms in football. I vote no changes, except maybe red pants once a year. I do like the red pants. I do like that. I thought the red pants they wore for the '80 throwback game against Arkansas. I thought the white stripe was a little too wide. Was it that wide in 1980? Maybe it was. I just don't realize that. I thought the white stripe was a little too wide, but I do like the red pants. But for whatever reason, the red, and I didn't necessarily think this when I was a kid and Georgia would wear these. I remember being a youngster, and when Georgia started wearing the silver breeches for every game, I was actually kind of happy about that. I remember at the time. But now I think for whatever reason, the red pants, the white jersey with the black block number, that's such a cool look. Such a cool look. Memphis Dog wants to bring back the silver breeches. Yeah, I do too. NFL teams seem to wear those. The metallic sheen pants. We're told college teams, it's too, what is the thing? People say they can't breathe. Is that what it is? That the metallic, I guess, outer coating makes it hard to breathe. I don't know if your thighs need to breathe, but I guess that's the case. James K says, I found a 1980s championship Coke bottle when cleaning our mother-in-law's house. I felt like I'd hit the jackpot. Yeah, I mean, obviously, we've gone through a really hard time with my wife's family. She lost both of her parents last year. Many of you are aware of that. And that's incredibly sad. And in the midst of that, we have their house to clean up. And that's a hard thing. It's one of those things like nobody loves doing that, right? But every now and then, when you're in the midst of that cleanup, and, Gene and I, our kids, our poor kids have had to spend more time over there than they'd certainly like. Every now and then when you do it, there's like this little thing that you find that makes the last 6 hours of doing this sort of feel kind of worth it. Whether it be like a 1980 Coke bottle or like, something from high school or something like that. You like unearth it's like, oh, wow, that's really neat. And you're glad to see it. Kind of takes you back down memory lane and all that like dusty stuff that you're pulling out and grabbing. Like eventually like, well, actually, I'm really glad that I saw this. This is kind of a cool thing to be, glad that I saw. It's like, that happens just enough not to make you go crazy, because having to, clean up in a state like that can be a really, really hard thing. But every now and then you kind of find something that you're at least glad that you saw. And it does make you feel like you hit the jackpot. You absolutely do. Memphis Dog says I can come clean his basement. So when I was a kid, my dad used to like to set up at flea markets. Like I'm talking about old school flea markets. And like one of my like weird pet peeves is that like now like flea markets aren't like flea markets used to be. Like when I was a kid, flea markets were people sold their old junk. Like it was like stuff that used to be in their house, and it was like random stuff. Now if you go to flea markets, it's like a little too organized. It's like people who have like tax IDs and they're selling stuff they bought from a wholesaler. But in the old days, like flea markets were like true old junk. So I have always, my entire life, like sifting through old junk. So that's always been something that I've kind of enjoyed. I think I'd be kind of good at one of those like Pawn Star type things, or like one of those like Antique Roadshow type deals. I think I'd probably be pretty good at that, because I do kind of enjoy that. If it's 100 years old, you can be probably pretty sure that I like it. Let's see what else. Jeremy Harbin says Georgia's the closest team to elite in college football right now. I believe that's probably true, Jeremy. I do. My overall feeling about Georgia through 3 games this year is admittedly different than it was a year ago, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. A year ago, after 2 games, I was fairly convinced that nobody really played at Georgia's level. We had seen Alabama struggle against Texas. We'd seen Ohio State struggle against Notre Dame. This is a year ago. And we'd seen Georgia thoroughly dominate as intensely as anyone could Oregon and South Carolina. You ever watch election returns, and like the math people that do the polling stuff, they'll be like 2% of the precincts reporting, but they've seen enough to call the election for so-and-so, not to get into like electoral politics, but you've seen that before. Like we didn't have very many precincts reporting, through September of last year, but I had seen enough that I was fairly confident Georgia was the best team in football. And so when you had the struggle game against Missouri and some of that kind of stuff, I'm for the most part kind of shrugged it off. What you say is, hey, I haven't seen anybody look great yet, but I'm still pretty sure Georgia is still the best. I think that too. That's why we still are obviously very much steadfast in our thoughts that Georgia will go for 3-23. But my level of confidence in Georgia right now, because a lot of this is based on results, is not as high right now as it would have been a year ago. But that doesn't mean they can't be there by the time it's all said and done. Jonathan Aaron says, besides the UGA Power Ranger uniform, what's your top 5 favorite alternate uniforms? I mean, I do think, like the red helmet with the black jersey, I do think that's a sharp look, right? I do. And, I mean, my second favorite is the red pants with the white jersey with the black number. That's for whatever reason, that just really pops to me. And then you go black jersey after that. As I've said before, I know a lot of people like the recruit thing with the all white and like the all red. That doesn't do as much for me as it does for some people. That's a little bit, and some of y'all love it. I understand this. For whatever reason, some of those alternate uniforms that the recruits wear are a little bit NC State-ish to me, a little bit. It does not look like a team with the heft of Georgia. I don't know why. That's probably a personal preference. It's not just a like knee-jerk anti-alternate uniform reaction because, as I said before, I'm a little softer edged about alternate uniforms than I used to be. But I don't love some of those recruit alternate uniforms they wear as much as some of y'all do. I don't hate them, but I don't love them. Like the white helmet does not do much for me. I think it would be interesting to see Georgia wear red helmets and, like, if you can't get the true silver breeches, then how about wearing a gray jersey that matches what are now essentially gray pants? Red jersey and then gray on gray. To me, that would look cool. Or I guess you maybe try to make it a little bit more silver. So, it's like you go with the silver tops to match the silver breeches, the silver jerseys to match the silver breeches. I think that'd be cool. So Georgia started wearing the silver breeches in 1980. Is that right? So you think about like when the next like milestone year would be, kind of a throwback to the start of the silver breeches era by wearing all silver. I think that'd be kind of cool. Crow King 123 says that's too Ohio State like. Yeah, I mean, maybe that's the case. I think that Ohio State's one of the worst offenders in my mind of what I don't like about alternate uniforms because, look, think about like a great brand like Dr. Pepper. It's one of our sponsors, right? Dr. Pepper's on college football commercials the entire weekend, right? Like Dr. Pepper would never say, hey, we're going to be cool to kids by doing a commercial where we have a completely different logo. They would never do that, right? Because you spend a lot of money and you spend a lot of time and treasure on establishing a recognizable brand. And you don't just invent a new brand overnight because you want to try something different. But college teams do that all the time. And if you're flipping channels on a Saturday, it can be pretty easy to tune on a game and not even know who you're watching because even Ohio State wears so many different uniforms, they sometimes don't look like Ohio State. And Ohio State ought to be one of the most recognizable brands in all of sports, not just college football, but all of sports. But they change uniforms a lot. So that's a little bit of like the traditionalist to me coming back out, even though I'm a little softer on the alternate uniforms. I do think that there is some brand value lost. I mean, I'll get on a soapbox for like 2 seconds and then I'll move off this. I think a lot of stuff related to uniforms is a scam. And I think it's a scam perpetuated by the apparel makers. Apparel makers are big in causing you to believe, oh, recruits like gear. Well, obviously that benefits the apparel makers to say that because they sell gear. Recruits are into new uniforms. But look at the teams who change their uniforms the most. It's not like they're dominating recruiting. Look at the teams who change their uniforms the least. Oftentimes those are the teams that are dominating recruiting. So, kind of a small-scale conspiracy theory. The whole idea of recruits are heavily swayed by gear. That myth is perpetuated by those who make the gear. Let's see what else. Johnny Surf Dog on what he thought that Carson Beck might be after the years of development. I would say give it time. I mean, Beck has certainly developed, or he's been in development over the course of these last 3 years. That experience is valuable. It certainly helped him win the job. But there's a different kind of thing around on-field development. And obviously that's what Carson's going through right now. Now, you can't wait 3 years on that, clearly. But I also think there's an exponential value in on-field play as opposed to off-field development. I believe that's probably the case. All right, let's go to Facebook here for a moment. We're going to get ready to wrap up after that. Let's see what else over here. All right, on Facebook here for a second. John Paul Williams says that red helmet is the brand no matter, let's see what this is. He says no matter what uniform they wear, they need to wear the red helmet. So I kind of agree with this. I think that's an interesting point. Maybe that's what I don't like about the white helmet is what if there was this middle ground? What if this was like the Connecticut Compromise of Georgia uniform talk? So you got the staunch traditionalists and you got like the people who would like to see Georgia wear a different uniform every week. Like what if like the kind of in-between thing here was, well, the one thing that should not change is that red helmet. Because I don't know, and I'm sure this is just my bias from having been a Georgia fan my entire life. I'm sure that's the case. But when those stadium lights shine on that red helmet with that white face mask, that's the coolest looking thing in the world to me. It just really is. I just think that red helmet, white face mask, lights shining on that. I mean, since I've been a kid, now how I feel now, it just gets me. I just feel it in my soul when I see that, and I don't think I quite feel that way about other helmets Georgia might wear. In fact, I hated the ones they wore to the Florida game in 2009. I hated those uniforms. That was also one of the rare moments in which Georgia has not worn a red helmet, at least in anything that kind of feels like the modern age. So I think that he might be onto something. You might have a little bit of flexibility with what you can do with your jerseys and your breeches, but maybe that red helmet shouldn't change. I don't think that's a bad idea. Roxanne Smith said, what about a silver helmet? The only thing I would ever perhaps agree to is it's hard not to like want to at least picture this stuff in your mind. So what if you had like the Power G, the big black Power G, and what if that was stamped on the side of like a chrome helmet? Would that look cool? Maybe it would. Can you make like red chrome? I wonder if you could do that. That might look cool. Gary Wismiller on the subject of the Cleveland Browns. Yeah, unrecognizable uniforms. Now, the Browns have probably ugly uniforms anyway, but at least it's an iconic look. Bryce Dixon says Kirby would never do that. No, probably not. David West says he wishes the shiny silver breeches would come back. I sort of do there as well. I mean, I certainly miss that. I was watching highlight the other day of like something from like the early 2000s, and there they were, just as shiny as ever. Really nice looking silver breeches. Randy Hall also mentioning Kirby Smart wearing the leather helmet at the Chick-fil-A game, which you love to see. Marshall Fleming says, I would think if we were ever going to wear the black jersey, it would be this week. Night game, cooler weather, fourth game in a row, extra home game. Because, see, Marshall, I'm right there with you on this. I totally agree that this to me feels like a good time to wear them. And don't even announce it. And don't, because there's a weird backstory involving Georgia in these dadgum black jerseys. We just understand that. And it's probably kind of dumb, and it's certainly been exaggerated, but it's a thing that kind of exists with a little bit of a negative vibe around it. So to me, the way that you trample that negative mystique is you just start wearing them more. I said a couple of years ago, maybe Georgia ought to wear the black jerseys for every home game for 1 year to kind of take the temperature down on the idea of black jerseys, and then just wear whatever you want. Like not make it special, just make it, because black is a Georgia color, just make it a rotational thing of Georgia may wear the red, they may wear the black, they may wear the traditional road whites. It's just a thing that Georgia does. It doesn't do it for the biggest games, but it also doesn't not do it for the biggest games. It's just whatever it feels like wearing, that's what Georgia comes out and wears. And fans like that kind of stuff. Here's the thing. It's like, and this is one of the things that, like, there's a certain stripe of, like, super serious sports writer who think they're curing cancer by the words they write. They'll never get this, is that uniform talk is just fun for fans, right? Whether you are, like, staunchly in favor of protecting tradition or whether you are, like, aggressively eager to see new things tried. Uniform talk is just fun for fans. It doesn't have anything to do with who wins and who loses. It's just fun because most of us grew up sports fans. Some of these people that do this for a living, I'm not quite so sure, but most of us grew up sports fans, and we fell in love with sports because of the uniforms. It just looked cool to see a professional athlete wearing a uniform. And so we have a little bit of a thing for uniforms, cool new ones, old classic ones, whatever. We just have a little bit of a thing for that. And this is kind of a fun conversation, even though it's in the grand scheme of who's starting an inside linebacker, by comparison, pretty meaningless. But not everything that's fun is important, and not everything that's important is fun. All right, a couple more things here. Barry Watkins' birthday tomorrow. Happy birthday to you, Barry. Hope you enjoy that. Miriam Corbin liked my idea, which is good. Joseph Kennedy likes the black jerseys there, too. William Camacho, good to see you in the show today. Appreciate that. All right, final trip around the comment section. We're going to wrap it up for today. Spencer Clark says that Deion is Kirby Smart in time. So let me tell you what I think, Spencer. Here is what I think that Deion's doing. I think that Deion is transforming what we're going to expect from college coaches moving forward. Now, I don't know that Deion ends up being the best version of this. He might. But I think that Deion is raising the expectation for what we think college football coaches are supposed to be. We have a pretty high tolerance for boring coaches right now. As long as you're good with your X's and O's, you can be only average when it comes to how you speak on behalf of your program. But with the emergence of Deion Sanders, I don't know if that's going to be true anymore. I was thinking about this yesterday, and I know y'all are going to hate this analogy because some of y'all don't like that I like pro wrestling. But please hear me out on this just for a minute. When I was a kid in the 80s, every bad guy had a manager. Like the wrestler did the wrestling and the bad guy manager did the talking. But somewhere along the way, WWE said, we're not going to pay two people to do the same job anymore. We want the wrestler to be good at talking, therefore we don't have to hire the manager. Now, Paul Heyman's still around, but for the most part, there is no Bobby the Brain or Jimmy Hart or all these guys that used to be there. They don't pay the manager to do the talking for the wrestler. They want the wrestler to be good at talking. And if you're not a good wrestler and a good talker, WWE is not hiring you anymore. You are unhireable to them if you don't have kind of the total package of skills. I think that college football coaching is kind of the same way. In the past, we've said, hey, if you're good on the field as a coach, however good of a talker you are, maybe that doesn't matter. You can be kind of stiff and kind of stale and kind of boring. As long as your X's and O's are good, that's your main job anyway. Well, I think that Deion is going to change the level of expectation that people have for coaches. Being good on the field with X's and O's is not going to be less important, but how you conjure up attention for your program is going to be far more important. There were 9 million people that tuned in last week for the Colorado State game. Now, that's probably a degree of overhype compared to what that game probably deserved, and I think that Colorado is going to lose a bunch more games before the season's done. And we may look back on some of this and laugh at it just a little bit. But still, do you know what the monetary value of 9 million eyeballs are, or 9 million pairs of eyeballs? Do you know what the monetary value of that is? It's incredibly high. And that's free earned media that Deion Sanders is gifting the Colorado program because of how interesting he is. We're going to find out in future years how good he is, how good of a coach he is when he doesn't have what looks to be an NFL caliber quarterback in Shedeur Sanders. We'll find all that out. We'll find out what happens if Shedeur, unfortunately, were to get hurt this year, given how many times he's been sacked. But the one thing is that Deion is cultivating an incredible level of attention in that program. And in future years, coaches are going to be asked to do the same thing. Now, to go back to the commenter's point, I think that Kirby Smart is well positioned for that world. Because even though his persona and personality is far different than Deion Sanders, Kirby Smart is also really good at conjuring up attention. What's the video we've been talking about all week long? It's the video from the South Carolina game. Y'all, that is Kirby Smart's version of being Deion Sanders. And there are knuckleheads online that think that, Deion invented all this stuff. Kirby Smart's been making halftime and post-game speeches for, long before Deion even wanted to be a coach. Like Kirby Smart is also good at that. Guys like Nick Saban, they're not. That's why Saban, I think, sometimes tries to cozy up to Deion. They do the Aflac commercials together. Saban said something nice about Deion this week. I don't think that Saban wants to be across from Deion, so therefore he puts himself beside Deion. But Kirby Smart, in a world in which we're going to ask coaches to be a lot more capable of cultivating attention for their program, I think that Kirby's really comfortable in that. The leaked speeches give you an example of that. Some of the leaked videos we sometimes see from recruits, that gives you an example of that. I think that Kirby's pretty comfortable as a youngish coach. I think he's pretty comfortable in a world in which coaches have to have a certain celebrity status. I think Kirby's pretty comfortable with that. There are some coaches who are not, and much like, the WWF of the 1980s, that's going to change the way this sport operates moving forward. There is no mouthpiece to do the job for you. You have to be the coach and the top spokesman for your team. And if you're not good at the other part, then you may not get to do the other part. Let's see what else. Brandon Griffin says, if Saban ever hugged a player, that'd be awkward to watch. I don't know. That's good. That's a good question. A Memphis Dog says Deion will probably be gone from Colorado in a few years, but you couldn't separate Kirby from UGA with a crowbar. Interesting comparison there, for sure. I really don't know what's next for Deion. He says he does not want to go to the NFL. Some people had suggested, well, if he goes to the NFL and coaches Shedeur there or Shiloh, but we mainly think about Shedeur Sanders. What if he goes to the NFL and coaches there? Maybe eventually he will do that. But there's a lot of what Deion brings to the table, and I would say that I'm far more pro Deion than not. There's a lot that Deion brings to the table that's a really good fit for college football. If you listen to most of what he says, I know there's a glamorous, sort of facade to all of this. It's the sunglasses, it's stuff like that. But most of what he says is just sort of homespun logic. Most of what he says is stuff that your grandma would have said, right? I mean, that's most of what he does. And that works in college football very, very well. Like Deion is bringing a certain just sort of hard scrabble logic to the table that always seems to exist more in college football than it does in the NFL. So, when Deion says that college is where he wants to be, I sort of take him at his word on that. G. Gray says, I like to get personal about Saban. It's pitiful. No, we're just calling balls and strikes around here, G. You know that. We just call balls and strikes. String Gene gives you the Philadelphia Phillies line. If Deion would just act like he's been there. Obviously, that's what the Phillies said about the Braves the other day, which it always comes back to this, right? So when it comes to like bat flipping and stuff like that, Major League Baseball, there is just a visceral response to this. You love it when your guy shows energy, and you hate it when the other guy shows energy. So if you're on the wrong side of Deion, you hate some of the histrionics. But if you're on the Colorado side of all this, you love somebody that's got that kind of passion for his program. The other thing that I like about Deion is, I don't know if he's done this in games, but I know he did this like the spring game. I like the idea of a head coach in a cowboy hat. Like that's kind of one of those things, especially out west. Yellowstone's real popular and things like that. A head coach in a cowboy hat, it's not a bad look for me. Jonathan Aaron says, am I superstitious? And if so, what do I do on game day? I would say I'm not that superstitious. As the old joke goes, I'm a little stitious. But there have been a few things that I have noticed about myself that almost veers in the direction of superstition. I don't really take it super seriously, but I also can't help but notice it. For instance, I take things with me to the game, right? So I was going to switch out my bag and start carrying a different bag, but then I realized, I've always carried this bag the last couple of years. If I change bags, is that weird? And the big one of those is that, a lot of people have like their game day shoes. I've worn the same pair of shoes for normally I get a new pair of shoes every season, but last 2 years I wore the same shoes. I just didn't go out and buy new shoes. They were expensive. So I just decided to wait and keep the ones that I had because they didn't look too bad. So I wore the same pair of shoes for both national championship seasons. This year, they're pretty worn out, so I'm not wearing them anymore. I'm just wearing another pair of shoes that I have. And so it did kind of bump into me a little bit of, oh, you're not wearing your national champion shoes anymore. So I'm not superstitious, but I did kind of think about some of that kind of stuff. All right, let's give you one more. BA's Tie, Stone Cold Style, says slow is smooth, smooth is fast, less mistakes. I miss the Big O more than anybody. His support on the offensive line can definitely be felt this year. Yeah, obviously there are going to be very few players ever kind of like what Darnell Washington is like. Fred Gunn says, I got that Jimbo money. Yeah, unfortunately, I do not. Like I live a pretty modest lifestyle for the most part. I did not, when I was younger, in like my 20s, early 30s, before I had kids, I had mountains of debt. Just it was a race to see how much I could spend at all times. When you get a little older, stuff like that just does not matter to you as much anymore. So we live a pretty frugal life. We do take, the occasional vacation, thankfully, but as far as like the day-to-day life at home, we don't do a ton of stuff. Memphis Dog says my shoes are getting stinky. They were, but they also just kind of fade. They just sort of look bad. You know how that goes. All right, back on Facebook one more time. We'll get ready to go. All right, over here. Dave Lender says, I've worn the same UGA shirt the last 5 years from watching the game on TV. It has holes all over it, but 2 national titles. So when I was younger, before I started going to every game, away games, things like that, when I was younger, my superstition back then was I was very serious about this. This is like as a child turning into a young teenager. I had to sit on the floor to watch the game. Did not like sitting in a chair to watch the game. I felt like Georgia played better when I sat on the floor. And so I was very, very big about sitting on the floor. Very big about that. Mike Mazzell checking in. Mike, we're glad to see you. Really glad that you're here. Good to see you, Mike. Let's see what else. Keith Foltz calling for Brock Bowers to the Heisman. You love that. Anything else? A little talk about Pat McAfee in here. Yeah, we're not. I mean, I don't hate McAfee shtick. You know, not really for me. Don't prefer it for college football, though. Jerry Poppins says, I don't necessarily shy away from anyone that can name 10 wrestlers or 10 NASCAR drivers, but I certainly do anyone that can name both. Hey, listen, I did not grow up a huge NASCAR fan, but I have kind of become a little bit more of a NASCAR fan. Easy for me to talk sometimes. When my son was younger, he got really into NASCAR for a while. And so you like what your kids like. And so I got into NASCAR then and just sort of stayed in it. Did not really grow. Like everybody when I was a kid in the 80s, everybody liked Bill Elliott, right? That was just the thing back then. Everybody liked Bill Elliott. But post-Elliott, I sort of fell out on NASCAR, even when it was like majorly popular in the 90s. And people that weren't around then don't realize how popular NASCAR was in the 1990s. Very popular. I was not really all that into it then. But it's sports, and so I've always been big into sports. So I'd follow it, but I wasn't like as big into it. But when my son was born, you know, he's almost 12 now, so you go back a couple of years ago. When my son was born, you know, he got really into NASCAR. We'd go to races. We'd watch the races each week. And I got more into it because he liked it. And now I'm just sort of into it. Now, in the fall slate, when they get into the playoffs, stuff like that, it's a lot harder for me to watch the races because I'm obviously busy doing football. But from like Daytona into the spring, into the summer, I'll tune on there. I'll watch a little NASCAR, you know, a little Cup Series pretty much every week. Pretty much. And obviously my love for wrestling is well documented. Listen, I am not a fancy person. You give me NASCAR, you give me wrestling, a little bit of bro country. Like I am not a fancy person. I am not a sophisticated palate. Mark Tolbert says, speaking of our place kicker, what are your thoughts on just one coach dealing with him and not so many people getting to his head? Mark, it's a good question. This is one of those things I'll sort of plead ignorance on. And I wish you could get Kirby to talk more about this kind of thing because I'll be honest, I really don't know what you do with kickers. I don't because, I mean, Kirby did talk this week about, you know, how you talk to him and try to encourage him. Like, that's a very mental position. And I remember, I don't go to Georgia practice a lot because I don't live in Athens, but I remember a few years ago you go there and like the little side practice field, which is not even there anymore, but the little side practice field, you'd see Rodrigo Blankenship. He's basically just over there by himself. And I'm sure that's not the way it was the entire practice. I'm sure he had somebody working with him. But, I mean, Blankenship, 20-something years old, I mean, he's, you know, not a young person. He's over there just sort of working himself. Like, I mean, I really don't know how you coach the kickers during practice, or certainly how you help them to handle the mental issues that perhaps arise when they get into a game. Now, back in 2017, they had Kevin Butler on the staff, and obviously that seems pretty easy. Butler's, you know, very good at doing stuff like that, you would assume. But in terms of a day-to-day operation, I mean, kicking seems like a very specialized skill. I would love to know a little bit more about how you actually coach kickers during practice. I mean, Kirby Smart is not a kicker. I mean, I'm sure he knows plenty about kicking, but I'd be curious just to know how that process is handled. That's one of those aspects of the football program I've never really felt like I have a good handle on. Richard D says, what's the best opposing team stadium experience from your perspective? People don't like it when I say this, but I do enjoy going to Williams-Brice Stadium. I'm always impressed with how their fans make a very loud environment, even when South Carolina most years is not very good. So in terms of the place that I'm typically the most impressed with, I would say that, the Gamecocks environment, I'll give them some credit for that. I'll tell you a nice stadium that you don't ever think about because it's 2 million miles from here. Reynolds Razorback Stadium in Fayetteville is nice. It's kind of a cool, nice stadium, pretty big. Fayetteville's a beautiful place. Arkansas is kind of a cool spot that we don't think too much about. All right, we got to go. It's very late. All right, y'all have a great weekend. Don't forget, Saturday, DawgNation postgame show, UGA Bookstore. We'll see you there for that. Your Zoom calls, you can join us live in person if you're leaving the stadium. You can also just watch, which we're always very grateful to have you do there as well. So we'll react to the game from the UGA Bookstore. That'll be cool. It'll be late at night, but we'll do it with you nonetheless. And then back here Monday for DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And tonight, Peachtree TV, Dylan Raiola and the Buford Wolves taking on the Marietta Blue Devils. What a fun showcase game that's going to be. We'll see you tonight, 8 p.m. Peachtree TV for that. Saturday in Athens for the DawgNation postgame show from the UGA Bookstore. Back here Monday, DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Have a great weekend.